You didn't find this message by accident. When life begins to feel unusually heavy, when old structures collapse, when people misunderstand you, when progress slows, that is not a sign you are failing. It is often the moment just before a profound return. The psyche does not announce growth gently. It announces it through pressure, and pressure, when understood, is preparation. What feels like an ending is very often the unconscious clearing space for your greatest re-emergence. This is not motivation. This is recognition. You are seeing this because something in you is reorganizing itself, and that reorganization is the beginning of the biggest comeback of your life. Every true transformation begins not with clarity, but with confusion. When the structures that once held your sense of self begin to crack, the mind interprets it as danger. You may feel as though you are losing direction, losing confidence, even losing yourself. Yet this inner disorientation is not a sign of regression. It is a signal that an identity built for an earlier stage of life has reached its limit. The psyche cannot grow indefinitely within the same form. When growth demands more space, the old container must break. This is why breakdown so often precedes breakthrough. The mind resists it because breakdown feels like failure, but psychologically it is closer to a molting process. What once protected you now restricts you. The roles you learned to survive, being the achiever, the pleaser, the strong one, the obedient one, eventually become prisons if they are never questioned. When these roles begin to collapse, the ego experiences panic because it confuses identity with existence. It believes that if the role dissolves, the self dissolves with it. But this is an illusion. The self is deeper than the mask it once wore. Nature offers no example of transformation without destruction. Before the forest renews itself, it burns. The fire does not ask permission. It arrives when the ground is overcrowded with dead growth. To the untrained eye, it looks like pure loss. But beneath the ash, seeds that could not germinate before finally awaken. In the same way, periods of inner darkness, depression, stagnation, withdrawal, often mark the moment when the psyche is clearing space for something more authentic. Modern psychological research confirms what inner experience has always known. Individuals who endure profound crises often emerge with a stronger sense of meaning, clearer values, and greater emotional depth. Not because suffering is desirable, but because it strips away illusions that comfort once allowed to survive. When life removes what you thought defined you, the pain feels personal. Consider someone who has built their entire identity around a career. For years, their sense of worth is reinforced by titles, praise, routine, and recognition. Then suddenly, the job is gone. At first, there is shame, a feeling of being exposed. Questions arise: who am I without this? What value do I have now? This moment can feel like psychological death. Yet many who pass through it later describe it as the turning point of their lives. With the external structure gone, suppressed interests surface. Courage appears where fear once lived. Abilities that never had permission to exist finally find room. What felt like humiliation becomes initiation. The breakdown hurts because it dismantles certainty. Certainty is comforting, even when it is false. The psyche clings to familiar pain rather than unfamiliar truth. But when the old identity can no longer support the inner life, symptoms appear, anxiety increases, motivation fades. The world feels strangely distant. These are not random malfunctions, they are messages. The unconscious is saying, this version of you is no longer sufficient for what life is asking next. Many people attempt to escape this phase by numbing themselves through distraction, substances, constant activity, or shallow positivity. But avoidance only delays the process. What is not consciously faced is lived out unconsciously, often as repeated patterns of dissatisfaction. The breakdown returns, louder each time, until it is listened to. Growth cannot be negotiated away. It demands participation. What makes this stage so difficult is that the new identity has not yet formed. You are suspended between who you were and who you are becoming. The mind hates this in-between state. It wants resolution. Yet psychologically, this liminal space is sacred. It is here that values are questioned, false ambitions fall away, and a more honest relationship with oneself begins. You may feel smaller during this time, but in truth, you are becoming deeper. If everything feels uncertain right now, it may be because certainty was built on something external. When that external support collapses, you are forced inward, and inward is where the real foundation lies. The question is not why this is happening to you, but what it is asking of you. What identity are you being invited to release? What role have you outgrown? What version of yourself worked once, but now costs too much energy to maintain? The psyche does not destroy without purpose. It dismantles what has become rigid so that life can flow again. If things are breaking down around you, it does not mean you are weak. It means you are at the threshold of reorganization. And although the process feels cruel while you are inside it, one day you will look back and see that this collapse was not the end of you. It was the moment you stopped living from a borrowed identity and began the slow, honest work of becoming real. A true comeback never begins with confidence, because confidence belongs to the surface of the personality. What begins first is confrontation, a meeting with what has long been avoided. When life prepares you for real change, it does not flatter you, it exposes you. The mind is forced to turn inward, not to admire itself, but to encounter the parts it once pushed away in order to function, belong, or survive. Within every person lives a hidden territory made of rejected emotions, suppressed impulses, unspoken grief, and unlived desires. These elements were not discarded because they were evil, but because they were inconvenient. At some point, they did not fit the image you needed to maintain. You learned early which traits earned approval and which invited rejection, and so you adapted. You became efficient, respectable, strong, agreeable, while quietly burying fear, anger, jealousy, vulnerability, and pain. This burial worked for a time, but nothing buried remains dead. It waits. When the unconscious senses that you are ready, often after a period of exhaustion, loss, or disillusionment, it opens the door to this hidden material. Suddenly, emotions you thought you had mastered return with force. Old memories surface without invitation. You react more intensely than you expect. You question beliefs you once defended. This can feel like regression, but psychologically it is progress. What is emerging now is not here to punish you, but to be acknowledged. The mind resists this process because it threatens the identity you worked hard to build. To face your shadow feels like admitting weakness, failure, or moral flaw. Yet the shadow does not grow because it is acknowledged. It grows because it is denied. What remains unconscious does not disappear. It operates from behind the scenes, shaping decisions, sabotaging relationships, and draining energy through constant inner tension. This is why so many people who appear successful on the outside feel strangely hollow or restless on the inside. High achievement can coexist with deep inner conflict. In fact, it often masks it. Many high-performing individuals report that their greatest breakthroughs, personally and professionally, came only after confronting traits they once refused to see in themselves. Fear of rejection, hunger for validation, unresolved grief, or unexpressed anger quietly influenced their choices for years. When these traits were finally faced, not judged but understood, something remarkable happened. Their energy returned. Repression is costly. It consumes mental and emotional resources to keep parts of the self locked away. Once those parts are brought into awareness, that energy is released and can be directed toward purpose, creativity, and authentic action. This is why confrontation precedes transformation. You cannot build a whole self by denying half of it. The return of old memories is not random. Memory is not stored chronologically. It is stored emotionally. Experiences resurface when the psyche believes the present moment can finally hold them. A childhood wound may reappear not because you are becoming weaker, but because you are now strong enough to carry it consciously. Emotional triggers intensify for the same reason. They point to unresolved material asking for integration. Integration does not mean indulgence. To integrate anger does not mean becoming violent. To integrate fear does not mean surrendering to it. It means recognizing these forces as part of your psychological reality and giving them a conscious place. Anger, when acknowledged, becomes clarity and boundary. Fear, when understood, becomes caution and wisdom. Grief, when felt, becomes depth and compassion. What is integrated transforms its nature. Many people fear that facing their darker aspects will make them worse. In truth, the opposite is almost always the case. The most destructive behaviors arise not from acknowledged darkness, but from denied darkness. History repeatedly shows that individuals and societies cause the greatest harm when they refuse to see their own capacity for it. On a personal level, what you refuse to see in yourself is often projected onto others. The enemy outside is frequently the shadow within. As this material comes to the surface, you may feel disoriented. The familiar narrative you told about yourself begins to crack. You may wonder who you really are beneath the roles and habits. This uncertainty is not collapse, it is honesty. The psyche prefers painful truth to comforting illusion. When illusion dissolves, truth initially feels destabilizing. But only truth can support lasting change. A comeback rooted in avoidance is fragile. A comeback rooted in integration is unshakable. When you stop running from yourself, you stop being internally divided. And when inner conflict decreases, clarity increases. Decisions become simpler. Boundaries become firmer. Your actions carry less inner resistance because you are no longer fighting yourself. What you integrate no longer controls you. Once brought into consciousness, these hidden elements lose their compulsive power. But what you avoid does not disappear. It waits, it accumulates, and eventually it rules from the shadows. The return you are entering now requires courage of a different kind. Not the courage to perform, impress, or dominate, but the courage to look honestly, without condemnation, at the totality of who you are. This confrontation is not a detour from your comeback. It is the doorway. One of the most profound indicators that a significant transformation is underway within you is a period of withdrawal, not from fear, not from despair, but from the ordinary currents of daily life. This is not mere loneliness, which isolates and diminishes the spirit, but a deliberate, almost instinctual solitude that the psyche demands. When you step away from the noise of the world, from the endless opinions, expectations, and distractions, something essential begins to occur. The mind, which has been stretched thin across countless obligations, judgments, and trivialities, finally has room to breathe, to observe itself, and to reorganize. Solitude is not absence, it is presence, the presence of your deepest self, of thoughts, feelings, and impulses that the constant bustle of life usually keeps submerged. It is during these quiet intervals that the psyche recalibrates, arranging previously disordered impressions into a coherent internal map. Scientific research on creativity confirms what intuitive experience has long known. Some of the most profound breakthroughs, artistic, scientific, or personal, occur not in the middle of commotion, but in silence. Solitude allows the mind to connect disparate ideas, to notice patterns that were invisible in the distraction of the crowd, and to cultivate a vision that is both expansive and precise. The periods that feel like isolation are, paradoxically, periods of intense internal activity, where the foundations of your future actions are being laid. You may notice that during these times, your patience for surface-level interactions diminishes. Conversations that once seemed meaningful now feel hollow. You may feel misunderstood, even by those closest to you. This is not rejection, but realignment. Your inner compass, previously dulled by constant external input, is now recalibrating. In this solitude, you begin to perceive subtler truths, not only about the world, but about yourself. You notice recurring patterns in your thoughts, the tendencies you have unconsciously repeated, the ideals you have neglected, and the fears you have avoided. What may feel like withdrawal is in truth a period of intense preparation for your return, a return that will be measured not by the approval of others, but by the clarity, depth, and integrity of your own decisions. It is important to recognize that every great comeback requires a pause. Even the human heart, which drives life forward with relentless energy, rests between beats. Without this pause, rhythm is impossible. Without rhythm, movement becomes inefficient, even chaotic. Similarly, your mind and spirit require this interlude. The stillness you may currently experience is not absence of progress. It is the secret laboratory of growth. During this time, ideas incubate, clarity sharpens, and emotional resilience strengthens. Each moment of reflection, each quiet hour of contemplation, is a necessary component in the architecture of your future self. Many people fear these periods, mistaking them for regression, laziness, or failure. They look at those who appear constantly busy and feel inadequate. But what you are experiencing is fundamentally different. While activity and distraction can create the illusion of forward movement, true transformation is often invisible at first. Just as seeds do not grow visibly above the soil during the earliest stages of germination, so too does the restructuring of the mind proceed quietly, below the surface. You are not falling behind, nor are you losing your place in the unfolding of life. You are gathering strength, aligning your faculties, and preparing to emerge with focus, vision, and precision that will surpass anything achievable through mere business. This process can feel uncomfortable. Silence magnifies unresolved tensions. Solitude exposes the cracks in your emotional armor. You may feel fear, restlessness, or even impatience with yourself, yet this discomfort is itself a sign that inner work is occurring. The psyche does not rebuild without friction. The old patterns, the habits, and the assumptions that no longer serve you are being gently, yet insistently, questioned. As you sit in quiet reflection, you are learning to tolerate your own presence fully, to observe yourself without judgment, and to allow your unconscious wisdom to guide you. Many extraordinary lives provide examples of how isolation can precede monumental leaps forward. Inventors retreating to their studies, writers immersing themselves in solitary thought, leaders stepping back to reflect on strategy and purpose. These periods of solitude are rarely appreciated by those around them, yet they are essential. In solitude, the mind synthesizes lessons from past experience, anticipates obstacles, and explores possibilities invisible in the rush of ordinary life. This is not escapism, it is preparation. Every pause in the outer world corresponds to a surge of creation in the inner world. The return from such a period of isolation is powerful because it is intentional and integrated. The clarity gained during this quiet restructuring allows for action that is measured, precise, and aligned with the deepest goals of the self. When you re-enter the world after such a period, your energy is no longer scattered. Your decisions carry weight because they emerge from reflection, not reaction. Your actions are guided by insight, not impulse. The world may not yet recognize the internal work you have accomplished, but it will be felt in every choice, every interaction, every manifestation of your purpose. In short, isolation is not withdrawal from life. It is immersion into the life that truly matters. It is a time when the mind restructures itself, untangles complexity, and attains the focus necessary for meaningful action. The discomfort you feel, the longing for connection, the impatience with stillness, all of it is part of the process. Trust it, honor it, and allow yourself the space to be alone. For in this solitude, your greatest strength is being formed, your deepest insight is being awakened, and your comeback, steady, authentic, and unstoppable, is quietly taking shape. In the early stages of life, motivation often wears the guise of external rewards. We act to please others, to gain recognition, to avoid criticism, or to outperform peers. Our energy flows outward, fueled by the judgments and expectations of the world. We chase goals that, at first glance, seem compelling, but which are ultimately borrowed from society, family, or circumstance. Achievement in this sense is a reflection of compliance, a mirror held up to the world, rather than an expression of the self. And for a time, this works. We accumulate accolades, status, and perhaps comfort. Yet, as the psyche matures, the insufficiency of this kind of motivation becomes evident. It cannot sustain us when the path grows difficult, when the obstacles are personal rather than external, and when life demands more than performance, it demands authenticity. During a true comeback, something subtle but profound begins to shift. Motivation, which once relied on extrinsic validation, begins to dissolve. It becomes unreliable because it is external and conditional. In its place arises meaning, an inner compass that points not to applause, reward, or recognition, but to alignment with the deepest values of the self. Suddenly, life is no longer about proving oneself to others. It is about finding and standing by that which is inherently true, that which resonates with the core of your being. Meaning becomes the force that drives action, and it is a far more powerful force than mere motivation because it sustains through difficulty, solitude, and doubt. In this process, questions that once seemed irrelevant now dominate thought. Why does this matter? What kind of life is truly worth living? What legacy, what expression, what alignment is essential to who I am becoming? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the very machinery of transformation. When life begins to confront you with these questions, it is no longer enough to chase rewards, to mimic success, or to follow a path defined by others. You begin to reject shortcuts and superficial gains because they cannot nourish the deeper self. You no longer tolerate what is convenient or socially acceptable if it compromises the integrity of your journey. The psyche demands authenticity, and it demands that your actions, decisions, and commitments reflect the meaning you are cultivating within. Psychological research supports what lived experience has long revealed: people who pursue meaning rather than external validation achieve a more profound endurance. They are capable of withstanding challenges that would exhaust or discourage those motivated solely by reward or recognition. Meaning provides clarity, for it directs every choice, every step, toward a coherent purpose. It also provides life satisfaction, not as a byproduct of accomplishment, but as a natural consequence of alignment between inner and outer worlds. In practical terms, a person driven by meaning can walk through hardship with a sense of grace and direction that cannot be manufactured by ambition alone. Their resilience is born not of ego, but of purpose. Their clarity is not inherited, but consciously realized. This shift explains why your standards begin to change during a comeback. What once sufficed convenience, approval, ease, now feels hollow. You are unwilling to settle for less than what resonates with the truth of your being. You may find yourself walking alone at times, or pursuing paths that others cannot yet comprehend. This is not loneliness, it is fidelity to meaning. Walking alone in this way is an act of courage, because it prioritizes the inner over the outer, the authentic over the performative. The world may not understand, may not applaud, and may even resist, but the psyche recognizes the necessity of this alignment. Your energy becomes concentrated, your decisions intentional, and your purpose luminous, because it is no longer scattered across external rewards or fears. It is anchored in the profound truth that what you pursue must be worthy of you, regardless of who watches. Your comeback, therefore, is not about vindication, proving to others that you were underestimated or wronged. That is a superficial form of motivation, one tied to reaction rather than creation. True resurgence is about fidelity to self, to values, to a vision that is uniquely yours. You act because the meaning is compelling, not because it is recognized. This distinction is critical. Motivation based on external validation is fleeting, subject to circumstance and opinion. Meaning, by contrast, is intrinsic and self-sustaining. It persists when enthusiasm fades, when circumstances are harsh, and when progress is invisible. It creates a foundation that no setback can destroy, because the source of the force resides not in approval, but in truth. The transition from motivation to meaning is rarely easy. It requires reflection, honesty, and the courage to abandon familiar pathways. It demands that you observe your desires and actions critically, distinguishing those that serve the authentic self from those that merely pacify the ego. This discernment may bring discomfort, for it challenges the illusions you once held about success, fulfillment, and identity. Yet, it is precisely this discomfort that signals growth. It is the inner psyche compelling you to step toward coherence, to align effort with essence, and to live with integrity. In the landscape of a comeback, meaning becomes the current that carries you forward. It transforms obstacles into lessons, failures into guidance, and solitude into reflection. Each choice, each action, becomes informed not by fear or desire for recognition, but by a deeper commitment to the life that is truly yours. And in this alignment, the comeback is not merely a return to previous status or capability. It is an emergence into a fuller, richer, and more authentic existence. It is a life lived with purpose, clarity, and courage, in which motivation is no longer needed, because meaning itself is sufficient to propel you toward your destiny. The human psyche is drawn forward not by fear, not even by desire, but by the compelling image of who we are becoming. There is within every individual a vision, sometimes vague and sometimes vivid, of a self that is stronger, wiser, and more aligned with truth than the one currently inhabiting the body. This image is not idle fantasy. It is a psychic force, subtle yet insistent, exerting pressure on every thought, every choice, and every moment of our lives. The reason we feel restless, uneasy, or impatient is because the present is no longer sufficient to contain the potential that has begun to stir within us. The old life, with its comfort, predictability, and familiar patterns, suddenly feels suffocating because it no longer matches the inner call toward growth. When you imagine the person you are becoming, someone courageous enough to face challenges directly, disciplined enough to follow through, emotionally aware enough to act from understanding rather than reaction, you are not merely indulging in daydream. Neuroscience confirms that visualization is a rehearsal for reality. The same neural pathways are activated when we vividly imagine performing an action as when we actually perform it. By holding an image of the future self in mind, you begin to align your habits, decisions, and behaviors with that potential. In other words, the psyche begins to reorganize itself around what it recognizes as authentic and necessary. Your thoughts, once scattered or reactive, start to gravitate toward this vision. Your actions, once hesitant, begin to carry a latent coherence that hints at the transformation already underway. This is why you may feel tension even in the midst of stability. Why small annoyances, habitual indulgences, or repetitive routines start to feel intolerable. Your future self is exerting a subtle but undeniable pull, and the present self, still habituated to old comforts, resists. This tension is not a flaw, nor is it confusion. It is a signal. It is the psyche's way of saying that the previous way of being is no longer adequate, and that change, even when difficult or uncomfortable, is necessary. People often mistake this tension for failure, procrastination, or restlessness, but in truth, it is the mark of a life on the cusp of significant evolution. Many individuals experience this sensation immediately before major life transitions. The entrepreneur feels restless in a secure but unfulfilling job, compelled to create something entirely new. The partner in an unaligned relationship senses subtle but constant discomfort, a psychic insistence to pursue integrity over comfort. The leader hesitates before stepping fully into responsibility, recognizing that the role demands a self that has not yet been fully realized. The student or practitioner of discipline feels inner friction, a constant pull toward habits, practices, and routines that stretch the limits of endurance. These moments are fraught with tension, yet they are also fertile. They are the pressure points where transformation occurs. The discomfort you feel is not a punishment, it is an invitation. It is the friction between the old and the emerging self that generates the heat necessary for transformation. Just as coal requires pressure to become diamond, so too does the psyche require tension to crystallize its potential. This is why attempts to escape, to numb, or to distract yourself from the restlessness only delay the inevitable. The image of the future self is persistent, demanding alignment. It is not satisfied with temporary consolation or avoidance. The inner call is relentless because it is speaking to the deepest needs of the self, not the superficial desires of habit or comfort. Those who embrace this tension discover an extraordinary truth. The pressure that once felt unbearable is, in fact, creative. It sharpens decision-making, heightens awareness, and encourages an honesty with oneself that the easy life cannot generate. Every small action, every choice made in accordance with the emerging self, reinforces the neural and psychological pathways necessary to inhabit that future self fully. The psyche rewards alignment with insight, energy, and resilience, while resistance brings only fatigue, frustration, and stagnation. Consider the stories of individuals who have experienced profound comebacks. Many describe the sensation of being on the edge of transformation, feeling an inner urgency that they could not yet articulate. A writer feels compelled to leave a secure position to pursue art. A leader senses a calling to step into ethical responsibility, even when the environment resists. An athlete abandons comfort to pursue mastery. Each reports a period of intense internal tension, a friction between presentabilities and emerging potential. It is precisely within this friction that growth is incubated. Without it, the future self remains unrealized, a shadow haunting the present without manifesting. To ignore the pull of the future self is to remain fragmented, living partially in the past and partially in a potential that cannot fully express itself. To embrace it is to accept discomfort as the necessary precursor to transformation. The pressure that seems oppressive is, in reality, a guiding hand, drawing you toward alignment with purpose, courage, and authenticity. This is the essence of a true comeback, the emerging self insisting on presence, clarity, and action in the here and now. The pull of your future self is also a form of discipline that the ego cannot impose upon itself. No external authority, no motivational speech, no fleeting inspiration can replicate this force. It is a psychic demand arising from a deeper order within you. When acknowledged and followed, it produces decisions, habits, and actions that are coherent, authentic, and sustainable. When ignored, it manifests as restlessness, dissatisfaction, and a sense of incompleteness that cannot be assuaged by temporary pleasures or superficial achievements. Your future self is neither a distant ideal nor a fantasy. It is already present, exerting subtle pressure on every thought, every action, every choice. The discomfort you feel, the restlessness, the impatience, the tension is not confusion. It is a signal that you are being called to step into a more integrated, capable, and authentic life. The question is not whether you are ready, but whether you are willing to follow the pull of who you are becoming, to allow the vision to shape your present, and to trust that the tension between the old and emerging self is the crucible in which your greatest self is formed. Your comeback will not look dramatic at first. It will look like silence, like honesty, like shedding illusions, like choosing integrity over approval. But one day, you will look back and realize the breakdown was the signal, the loneliness was preparation, the doubt was initiation. You were not falling apart. You were being rearranged. And now, quietly, powerfully, you are returning to yourself.